Hello there, welcome to our show. Today I'm looking at gangs in New York in my series They Needed This Failure. Now, I've already done 1941, which is about how Spielberg learned this failure from 1941 to move on to do some of the big hits. You know, after having hits, he'd have a big failure, then he went back on track. Then I did Body Double, which De Palma learned from a mistake Body Double, but it was an ambiguous change because he changed to become more mainstream. And he lost something, and then eventually he got it back later on down the line once he purged out some of the interesting things. Now, this is Scorsese I'm talking about here with Gangs in New York. This is a case of a person who didn't seem to learn from his mistakes. You know, it seems to have been something that he had been edging towards for a while, and this is a bit like where everything went off the tracks. Now, Scorsese, even though I bash Scorsese a little bit in my videos, I was a fan of his all the way up until this film. And even when I first saw this film, I didn't think it was as bad as some people said. But obviously I was delusional, because when I've watched it recently, I was like, oh, I know what they're talking about now. But, yeah, he was 70s, 80s, 90s. He was on a very good run, That's where most of his classics come from. That's where his reputation comes from. And the 2000s onwards, he's winning Oscar and stuff. I don't think those are the films you're going to be looking at him and you think Scorsese. And this was the film where you first got indication that his time had passed. Like, his peak it was well gone. Because he'd started out as a bright young thing, part of the movie Brats. Did the 70s and early 80s thing where they did all these personal films, they did these really subversive films, they did films that messed everyone about. Then the 80s crash came and they had to try and find a way within the studio system. But him and De Palma found ways to survive. Spielberg thrived. Coppola just slowly went away. Same with Milius. And then in the 90s he seemed to have found his footing again. I mean, he made Goodfellas to start the decade off. He had the sellout film of Cape Fear, which is the worst of his mainstream films. He did a mainstream film with Colour of Money before, but it was an entertaining film. And it helped get made Last Temptation of Christ, which is one of his best films. After Cape Fear, he made one of his best films, Age of Innocence. It's terrific. He made Kundun, which is terrific. See, he did Casino, which is very flawed, but I like it a lot. Bring the Dead is underrated. It's not his best, but it's a nice little film. It's written by Schrader. It was a solid, middle level Scorsese film. It was nothing to be ashamed of. It was fine. So it still was a case of, okay, he made one film and maybe wasn't as big as it could have been, but he was still batting pretty good average for a big director. He still held his own. And the thing with him was, you're looking forward to his golden period where he matured and where he would actually make the films where we learned from his mistakes and learned from the errors he made over time, and he would do the kind of mature films, like the Ozu films, that kind of thing. And that did not happen, at all. That's just not happened at all. He's tried, but they've not worked. And he kind of went into something that he'd been doing a little bit. He started off with Goodfellas, which was an epic story about a gangster over his life. And because it worked out so well, he did it again with Casino, which was more about a certain placement of this guy's life. Because Goodfellas was a life all the way through the gangster life until he left gangster life. In Casino, it was all about Las Vegas, how the casinos worked during the mafia time, how the scam worked. All that stuff was terrific. There was a personal story where De Niro falls for Sharon Stone and he wants to make her what he thinks she should be, and it's that never works out. It's his ego that creates the folly. It's still an interesting film. I mean, Joe Pesci as the kind of crazy mafia guy steals the show. Everybody's good. All the supporting characters are good. It's the first film though Scorsese made where he had a lead character, protagonist, that didn't change much and was a bit, one-dimensional. But that was the point in that one. It was like this hollowed guy who didn't have any personality, he didn't have hobbies. And this was before De Niro really started to have his fall as an actor. So it kind of worked. Because, De Niro did this, he did Heat, at the same time. It was still a good double whammy for him, even though he's better on Heat. But it was one of those ones was, it's not the best one I've done, but Bond is one of my favourites. It's like one of those things, I know it's flawed, but I really enjoy it. I can watch Casino anytime. It's wonderful. Now, Scorsese, like most directors, he has a bunch of pet projects that take a while to get going. Last Temptation of Christ was one. Goodfellas was one. These are personal films. Age of Innocence. Casino wasn't one. Casino was one of the ones that was brought to him, and it was a commercial film, but it made it kind of personalised it. Kundum was one he wanted to do for a bit. Bringing the Dead wasn't. It was a assignment, but all his own people were there, so it might as well have been. But Gangs of New York was another one of those developed projects he developed for a long time. I wanted this for a long, long time, because it's all about what everyone knows about the gangs in New York in the 20th century. There's been films made repeatedly about them. Like, from the time of their existence till now, gangsters have always been a big thing in American film. So Scorsese wanted to go back to the last century and see what they were like during the Civil War period, which would have been a really interesting project. That's fascinating. You can see why he was fascinated by that, because someone who dealt with gangsters, like, how do you deal with gangsters? They're slightly different ethnic origin. They've got different religious beliefs. Scorsese is an Italian director, but a lot of people he's making films about was the sense of the first Italians to come to America and how they survived in America, and this was before that really happened when it was Irish immigrants. So that was a different take. That was unique. So you thought, okay, this could be really different. And it didn't really work out very well. Because Ireland and Italy are two different places. They both have a mix of Catholic and Protestant religions and fighting each other, and that contention, the old world tensions that come through into their descendants. They've got that. But Ireland and Italy are two different countries, different temperaments. And he doesn't get the Irish. And that's one of the big things that here is the Irish characters are. If you know Ireland at all, it's like, this doesn't feel like Ireland. Or Irish descendants. It doesn't really feel like that. It just doesn't, the character stuff just feels all wrong. But okay, that happens though. Sometimes you make a film about a subject and that happens. So, all the details, because I'm Scottish but I come from like some Irish descendants as well, and west coast of Scotland there's like a Catholic Protestant thing still going on, even though it's been muted over the years because it's ridiculous. It's still there. You still know there's still Catholic schools, Protestant schools, even though it's got a lot more less stringent now because the churches have lost a lot of power. But you kind of know the basic feelings of people and the basic things that are important to them that come from the two different religions. You can know it just instinctively, and this just doesn't quite feel. This feels very vague. The look at religion feels very vague, but that's the least of the film's problems. But that's what should have been the main issue of the film, is like, what were these people? And that's the first thing it gets completely wrong. It just has like American actors and British actors with Irish accents most of the time, and they don't feel Irish like, at all. They don't feel descent of Irish people. They don't feel at all Irish. They feel like American actors playing Irish. They're better than Tom Cruise and Far and Away, but that's not hard. It's but it feels like a caricature, but a very vague one. They don't want to be caricatures. They try not go into the obvious caricatures, but there are other sort of caricatures in there that's. It just does not feel like who they're meant to be representing. All the accents feel a bit off. But they shouldn't actually just be fully Irish. It's part Irish, part American. But it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like they've actually figured out what they would have sounded like, because if you go to any place that's immigrants, their dialect is so tied to being half one, half the other. It's going to have lots of weirdness to it that you have to unknot. And this didn't have any of that, and it just feels like every time anyone's speaking, you just don't feel the context. So that becomes an issue. Like, the only person who feels kind of right is Gary Lewis, who's a Scottish actor, and he gets the hatred and the nastiness, petty nastiness of that kind of tension. Maybe the other actors don't get it, and it's like he just jumps out at everybody because he's much more alive. Even though he's playing one of the worst characters, the racist, bigot, horrible person, the sellout. He's vicious as hell, he's nasty, but at least he feels like he's kind of in the right area. And other actors feel that way. Even Daniel Day-Lewis, who's very good in the film, feels like a caricature, weird variation of stuff. He's not quite Irish, he's something else. He's not really meant to be Irish, he's meant to be a native who doesn't like the Irish. But he feels something else. But he's a bit different, but it is like a broad performance. And thank God he's there, because if he wasn't there, this film would be so much more unwatchable. So the basic problem to start with is you don't have the religious base for the characters or the social base. The view of religion, they bring it in, and it is like, oh, it's the natives who are who do not want to be tied to the church, which is a good angle to have, like, because everyone's paranoid about the church and the Catholic religion through Europe during the Reformations and afterwards. It's always something that was going to be attention. That's good to have that, but it doesn't really land because it's there and it's not, and it's there and it's not, and it just feels like something that isn't fully created as a theme. It just feels like it's there to show why this person is the way he is. But the Irish, they're meant to be religious, but only when they need to be religious. Like, they're actually scumbags a lot of the time. They're just out for themselves most of the time, but they're deeply religious. And it doesn't, because he didn't quite know where the connection of religion and just like basic common sense and survival fits him in this culture. And everything feels vague. It just feels like you're watching like a play of somebody who's from one culture doing another culture. It just feels that weird. Which is weird. It's funny because Scorsese made Age of Innocence, he got it a lot better. He understood this Americans who try to be very English. He understood that. In this one, he doesn't seem to get the poor. And it's like weird, like he would not get that, right? Because he's such a working class director. But he does not get it. It's a weird feeling. It's like, you're watching everybody's about 2 beats off. And that happens for every actor and every movement and story. It just creates this wayward feel for the film that's just never clicks in. And that was the first thing the first failure that Scorsese's moved on and kept doing for me, is that he's moved away from his culture a lot. He doesn't want to keep on doing old gangster stories, which is fine, but you have to do culture you have some feeling for. The Aviator was just 40s Hollywood, felt the same kind of weirdness to it. Not quite as bad as this, but it still felt like it was originally a Michael Mann project, and it feels like Scorsese hadn't originated it, and it did feel like he was very distant from it. You know, the one he won an Oscar for, the remake of Infernal Affairs, was another one that felt like kind of half and half. It was watchable, but that was about it. You know, then he went to Japan. I mean, he's done Hugo, which is my favourite of his films in the last 20 years, because it seemed to be what it meant to him. But one of the big things about him is he's viewed as a realistic director, but he's not. He's a stylist director. He just likes it from a working class environment. But he needs to connect with the subject. And I'm feeling a lot of the time he's not connecting to the subject. And in Hugo, he understood what the subject was, what he wanted. It was a child's view of cinema. And it clicked in a way that a lot of his other films had not clicked for a long time, because he seemed to understand where he was going with this one. And then he went back off to Japan and did The Silence, which was really vague, and it's not as good as the original version of the film, which is much more brutal and much less sentimental, because it's a Japanese film who understood Japanese culture and where they're brutal at. And this film just, Scorsese was just bloated and big, and it didn't quite have the impact. He did Wolf of Wall Street, which in a good first half, it was better than he'd been for a while, but it's still really bloated. And that's the second problem Scorsese's having. It really started this film as the running times when it started to go haywire. Like, Goodfellas is a longer film, but it feels justified in its length for what it's telling you. Casino's too long. It could have lost 20 minutes quite easily. It didn't have the discipline. But it was one of those ones where you think, well, hopefully we'll learn from that mistake and do it better next time. And this one, that didn't happen. And then from then on, his films have been getting long. Even the shorter films feel too long for their running time. It just feels like he just lets things run now, and there's the cohesion between the scenes and the get up and go just isn't there. So he hasn't adjusted his style to be an older man trying to work out the world as an older man. No, he's trying to keep doing what he was doing in style, but he hasn't really adjusted his style to his own interest now, and he just feels like he's doing films that don't seem to be the films he's a passion for. And even does films he's a passion for, it feels like the discipline to really break it down and be brutal about what's important and what's not, and what he's done before. It just feels like someone who's gone through his old interest and doesn't have a strong point of view of what the world is now. It just feels like he's just recycling, but he's just making things longer. Which is the David Lean thing as well, where he just made films longer rather than more cohesive and more to the point. Because if you look at like older Uzu films, he died fairly early, but his stuff was cut down to the basics, really, so you knew what was going on, and you weren't having to watch a film for 3 hours and wonder why the hell you're watching it, which is basically The Irishman. It's like, that's when he went back to his old gangster roots, and he seemed to have completely lost interest and completely lost touch with what the hell he was doing. And he had terrible special effects. I think that one, that was like, I've done the whole video on that one. But Gangs of New York was the start of that. That was the kind of, the bloat really had kicked in then. The next problem is the lead character. One of the big things is Scorsese always used to connect his lead characters to the world so that their trauma in the world were rubbing off against each other all the time. That made interesting elements like Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Last Days of Christ. What the world was around them and what the characters' dynamics were rubbing off against each other. And they were playing off each other and creating sparks so you create more of the world and more of the character. From Gang New York onwards, he seems to have gone for like blander characters and younger actors who who are more financiable for getting the money, but who do not seem to understand his films. Like, the obvious one is Leonardo DiCaprio, who can be a decent actor for other directors, but for Scorsese, a lot of the time he seems blank, like he doesn't quite know what he needs. And it seems like he's drained. Because in this one, he's meant to be a guy out for revenge. And he's meant to be a guy pondering, very Hamlet-like pondering, should he go for revenge or shouldn't he? That's what you're meant to be feeling. What you actually are feeling is this weird guy who doesn't really fit in anywhere, and he does all these things, and things happen. It's a character that has no juice to them. It's the performer and the director cannot get together. And then they keep on working together, and until Wolf of Wall Street, he was never that good as a Scorsese film. I mean, you look at him and something like Catch Me If You Can, which he made the same just after Gangs of New York, where he was much better and he understood his part. But Gangs of New York, he's just bland and there's just nothing there to him, and it's like he doesn't either. He's not mature enough to do the character, or the character's not there. And I'm starting to think the character's not there because Scorsese does that with a lot of his lead parts. From then on, it's just like there's a character who's vaguely planned out, but the specifics aren't there. He doesn't seem that interested, and he's going for a much younger character than himself. So instead of having a character you can identify with, like Travis Bickle or Jake LaMotta, even though it's a monstrous version of himself, there's something, the character connection there for him. At this point, it's just like, why is he interested in this guy? Because the guy's boring. And there's no sense of a director or a writer putting himself through that character and creating a world around them. So from now on in the films, the guest star basically, like Daniel Day-Lewis or Alan Alda, Aviator, the kind of villainous character is the one that gets all the reviews because they're the ones who are dynamic. Those are the Scorsese characters who are just stuck to little parts of the film. I mean, Day-Lewis is great in this film. He's way over the top, but very subtle at the same time. And he's deserving of a much better film because he's only getting snippets of things, but he does seem like a character who's messed up and weird, and he would normally be sent to this kind of film. But it's not financeable to actually do that, so they have to find a way to have a blander character. So Scorsese, to get the budgets, he's had to have a kind of more Hollywood lead character. And that's just led to disaster for the actual quality of the film. And he gets away with it, because, I mean, none of the critics have the guts to actually call him out on it. So, it was a problem here. If he'd learned from it and thought, okay, I'm not going to do that again, it would have been fine. But like the epic running time, it just feels like he's a lot of stuff to say, but he can't actually get access to the things that really interest him, or he hasn't found his way through to the next level of life, how to express what he feels now. So he gets this vaguely developed character as a lead that's a lot younger than him and he can't quite work him out. And he gets a world that always feels a bit more caricatured because he can't connect him to lead character. And the characters here feel like they should be in Warriors Water Hill film I talked about a few weeks ago. That's what they feel like. It's just like, ta-da, look at these characters. I mean, the last third of this film falls apart so badly. Like, the main fight in the end of the film doesn't really have anything to do with the actual riot that's going on. It's just almost like, oh yeah, well, we have to end this story and suggest that maybe there's something bigger going on around the little fight. But the film can't even deliver that. It's too busy having all these special effects stuff and all the rest of it, and you've got lots of people getting killed that you've barely seen. You've got all these supporting actors who you've seen been better in a lot of films, just basically been scenery. Gang New York's a terrible film. It really is. I mean, the love story's awful. The lead character just does not progress scene to scene. He does one thing, then you think he's going to do another thing, following on from what he just said or did. Now he goes and does something else, and it's never explained why these connect up. Because I don't think it's been rewritten so many times it doesn't connect up anymore. It's just like there's no character here. I mean, you get a film watching this. You get a film I got out from watching Island of Dr. Moreau by John Frankenheimer, where it was just a disaster, and it's like there's no one in charge anymore. Things are happening, and you're just going to go, yeah, okay, things are happening. And that's what I mean, Scorsese never went this incompetent again in a film. You didn't have a 40 minutes of film at the end where you're going, why am I watching this? But that feeling I get from the end of that film, I felt a lot through Scorsese since then. It's like that sense of drift the lead character, drift the world. It's a director who hasn't moved on to the next level of his career. Instead, it's kind of sold out and said, I'll do the compromises for the budgets, rather than saying, okay, I'll just cut my budgets down now and I'll just do smaller films. You know, his reputation's so big he can actually command these budgets, so he thinks, well, I might as well try and use it while I can. But it doesn't suit him. It's never suited him. His best films tend to be lower budgets, and it's like, what are you doing? And he spent so much of his time recently doing these kind of epic films. He's been rewarded by Oscars and good reviews, and he's had 20 years of like mediocrity. You know, it used to be you'd much rather watch Scorsese film than Spielberg, really, in the late 80s, early 90s, because Spielberg was fluffing around at that point. Now I'd much rather watch a Spielberg film than Scorsese, because Spielberg, it might not be top level Spielberg anymore, but at least he's still trying. He might make an odd bomb, but he's still trying. You feel the effort of his films nowadays, even though he's still chugging away. Maybe not all of them are great, but he's still I feel someone's making these films. They're still trying to do something. With Scorsese, it's like, what's he doing? Really, what's he doing? And that's basically Gangs of New York. It's just the start of something where the films get quietly gaudier. They don't stick in your memory. There's lots of violence, but for what's sake, there's no scene to stick in your memory as, oh, that was a great scene. It's just like scenes that are just there. You know, they're just things that happen, but they're not specific. There's no character you can latch on to from the last 20 years of filmmaking like you could from the first 30 years. They're just not there. There's no, like, progression to actually make a film about someone his own age. Like, The Irishman is like, it was a dull character, a dead character from using all his old collaborators. It's just one of those things, it's like, well, this guy just seems to have fallen off the map as a director. So this is they need this failure. This is what happens when you don't learn from your failures. When you don't say, okay, what did I do wrong here? How can I learn from this and actually go ahead? Because I was really looking forward to an older Scorsese. And it's really one of the reasons why I think a lot of people who are disappointed with the last 20 years of Scorsese are so disappointed is we expected a lot and we got just mediocrity that's still getting praised, and it's like, this is one of the great disappointments really in his career, the last 20 years of his career, and no one even brings it up. It's like, no, you can't say that about him, he's Scorsese. Yeah, and it's been horrible for 20 years. So the one good film, Hugo, in 20 years, and the rest have been at best okay. So that's me I'll stop now to wrap up this film, because I could rant on for another 20 minutes quite easily. But I try and make my points clearly. So, hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back soon for another one, but that's me for now. Bye.